Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's my final thoughts for week 8 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look we do earlier in the week. I'll have my core plays and lineup building video scheduled to go tomorrow if you do want to check that out. But if you find the specific content helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become a official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. If you enjoy the free content here over on YouTube, I'm sure you'll like the extra content over there, including optimizers for all sports, ownership projections, cheat sheets, data sheets, color coded nice and neat. So it's quite easy to follow in a Discord community. Link can be found down below if you do want to check that out. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're new signing over on PrizePicks, you get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. When you use it to your advantage, when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. To be honest, I am not liking any of the cheap quarterbacks this week, so I'm thinking it's going to be a spend-up spot this weekend. Typically, I like to spend down if I can, but I've been kind of living in this upper 6K, mid 7K range for the most part this season anyway, so this isn't really anything too new for me. I'm just saying cheap quarterbacks this week don't really look that great, so we'll have to find some value elsewhere. But let's start up top with Josh Allen, $8,100. Gets a great matchup here versus Miami. They've been terrible versus the run or the pass this season. And Buffalo looks for the football. He's got plenty of weapons to get the ball to. No Dawson Knox, but he still has Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Manny Sanders to get the ball to. So I think Josh Allen will be just fine. He's been great recently. The highest implied team total on the slate at 31.5, nearly a 50-point over-under. They are 13.5-point favorites at home, but I'm not too concerned about that. The Bills should be just fine fantasy points-wise. Josh Allen should still get there because the Bills are going to blow out the Dolphins or have a big lead. It's probably because Josh Allen had a pretty strong game. And looking at his numbers on the season, they've been excellent. Nearly 40 rushing yards per game, close to 300 passing yards per game, 2.5 passing touchdowns. Really nothing not to like about Josh Allen. He had a kind of a slow start to the season, but he's definitely righted the ship. And plus Miami, 27 versus quarterbacks, laying over 300 passing yards per game, and they're 26 versus the pass, so really hard not to like Josh Allen and his options to stack with him this weekend. Besides the price point, that's really the only bad thing, but I think in tournaments, that's definitely a great spot. Matthew Stafford, $7,600. Another great spot here, kind of similar to last week where he was a 16 or 15.5-point favorite at home versus Detroit with around a 30-point implied team total. Kind of a similar situation here, although he's on the road in Houston, but not a very good defense, 14-point favorites. Nearly a 31-point implied team total here. Again, not too worried about them being such big favorites because if they end up blowing out the Texans or having a big lead, probably because Matthew Stafford had a very good game. So I'm not overly concerned about that. A little bit cheaper than Josh Allen. Doesn't have quite the rushing floor that Josh Allen has, so he's a bit riskier, which is why I think he's a turn-on play only for me. But Stafford's been amazing this year. I have nothing bad to say. 9 yards per attempt, 310 passing yards per game, nearly 3 passing touchdowns. He's been playing an MVP. He's got Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, Van Jefferson, even Deshaun Jackson as a deep threat, and Darrell Henderson out of the backfield to get the ball to. So no shortage of weapons for Matthew Stafford. The Texans have kind of just been mid-pack versus the pass this season, 12th DVOA, but they are 22nd versus quarterbacks, and this is a high-flying offense, and he's been excellent this year, so I have no concerns about the Rams. Tom Brady, I wouldn't say this is the greatest matchup in the world. He's $7,400 facing New Orleans on the road, but as good as this Buccaneers offense has been this season, even without AB, it looks like he's going to get Gronk back. He's just been cooking all season long. 50-point over-under here, 5-point favorites, 27.5 implied team total, which seems a bit low for them considering what they've been at the past couple weeks, but 325 passing yards per game, 3 passing touchdowns, nearly 40.5 passing attempts per game. Obviously no rushing upside from Tom Brady, but as good as he's been, as good as the weapons are, it's really easy to stack with him because Mike Evans, I know AB's not playing, but he's always cheap, and so is Chris Godwin. It's not hard to stack Tom Brady. He gets the job done each and every single week. Even use Leonard Fournette because he's using the passing game. So I realize this matchup versus New Orleans, they are 4th versus quarterbacks and 60th versus the pass, but this is definitely one of the toughest tests they will face all season long, so I don't mind Tom Brady in tournaments. Justin Herbert, $7,300. Not a big fan of the Chargers here because New England's not the easiest matchup out there. They are 14th DVA versus the pass and allowing the 8th fewest points per game to the position, but he's got great plays to get the ball to, and Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, who I think are all viable DFS plays this weekend. Only a tournament option for me, would not go there in cash games because the cash game QB is $100 cheaper than Justin Herbert this weekend, but if you're looking for a pivot, I think Herbert is fine, although I would say he's probably my least favorite quarterback of the bunch we're talking about here. Then at the bottom here, we have our cash game quarterback of the weekend, the one I'm projecting to be the highest owned quarterback on the entire slate, but it's Jalen Hurts, $7,200. I know he's not the best quarterback out there, but for fantasy purposes, he seems to get the job done every single week. He's been over 20 fantasy points each weekend, and he's facing Detroit. It may not be pretty. Maybe you don't want to watch the game, but at the end of the day, you'll probably be happy with the output that he gives you. Detroit has been terrible, whether it be versus the pass or the run this season. I say the run because Jalen Hurts does a lot of his damage on the ground, averaging around 50 rushing yards per game this season and close to a rushing touchdown, which is a really nice built-in rushing floor. Detroit is currently 27th DVA versus the pass. I believe they're bottom 5 or bottom 10 DVA versus the run this season. Obviously, have not been good whatsoever. And they're 21st versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 280 passing yards and over 2 passing touchdowns per game. So Hurts, just in a soft matchup versus Detroit, he's got cheap pairing options in Dallas Goedert under 5K and Devonta Smith at $5,500. So like it Hurts, whether it be cash games or tournaments this weekend, is one of the best matchups you could ask for a quarterback that's been struggling in real life. Moving on to the running back position, the guys up top I have here more so as tournament plays because I just find myself kind of sticking to that like mid 6K to lower 7K range in cash games this weekend. But Austin Eckler and Najee Harris with their pass catching ability make them in play every single week because they have such high floors. Like looking at their target numbers this season. You gotta keep in mind Austin Eckler had a game where he had 0 targets, so it kind of bumps his numbers down throughout the season. But he still has around a 13.5% target share, close to 5 targets per game. Najee Harris about a 20% target share and close to 8 targets per game, which is some really solid numbers, especially for running backs. And both guys don't really find themselves in the best of matchups number-wise, but I think the way they are utilizing their offense will make them just fine, which I'll talk about in a second. So New England, they're 14th DVA versus the run, allowing the 14 fewest points to gain in the running back position. But where they have struggled this year is allowing nearly 7 catches per game and 60 receiving yards to the running back position. Also, as far as Najee Harris goes, the Browns are 3rd DVA versus the run this season and 4th versus running backs. But they have a really good defensive line. The Steelers' offensive line is really bad. Big Ben can't push the ball on the field, so he's going to get pressured all game long by Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett. So what's he going to do? Probably dump off a lot of short passes to Najee Harris. He's just getting peppered so many targets, it's kind of hard for him to bust any given week. And I think at $7,500, he is priced pretty fairly because we're going to get close to 20 rushing attempts and probably close to 10 targets. So we'll take that volume every single day. Then moving down to some more cash game friendly options, we have Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift in the 7K range. Taylor is fine. I prefer DeAndre Swift just because he's more involved in the passing game, but Taylor hasn't playing very well recently. He's getting the rock more, and he gets a good matchup here versus Tennessee as they are 25th DVA versus the run, despite being 8th versus running backs. But this is not a good defense, and they've just been so bad versus the pass this season. That's really easy to do that, but I'm not scared of this Tennessee run defense. I think Taylor and the Colts offense will be just fine versus them. Should be probably a threat to get 100 rushing yards again and probably find the end zone. DeAndre Swift, if you are stacking the Eagles, he's a great run back option, even though he's a running back. Because typically we think of a run back option as like a wide receiver or tight end, but the way DeAndre Swift is using this offense, it's pretty much like an Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, or Austin Eckler, where I wouldn't say maybe Najee Harris because Najee Harris gets a lot more rushing volume, but DeAndre Swift should get you around 10 to 13 rushing attempts, and he's probably going to get you close to 10 targets, especially when they're trailing, and they are dogs once again, which the Lions are no strangers to trailing in games, and when that's the case, they just dump it off DeAndre Swift and let magic happen. We saw it happen on the first drive though in the last game versus the Rams where he had a 63-yard receiving touchdown, but on the season, over a 20% target share, over 7 targets per game, 6 catches on 55 receiving yards, was very close to hitting the receiving bonus last week, and Philly has not been good versus running backs this season, 29th DVA versus the run, and allowing the 3rd most points per game in the running back position, and 7 catches per game on 50 receiving yards. So I am loving DeAndre Swift. He is one of the best plays in the entire slate, and he makes sense to use in lineups that you have Jalen Hurts or Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert as a nice run back option, so it does correlate well this weekend. You can play him in cash games or tournaments. I think he's going to be quite highly owned, and he projects very well by projections this weekend. Joe Mixon, $1,600. It's a good spot here versus the Jets. He's not at home, but he's still a 10.5 point favorite, 26.5 applied team total. Obviously, Samaje Perine been kind of cutting into his workload, but Joe Mixon still in a very good spot here. He's been good this season, close to 18 rushing attempts per game, 4.4 yards per carry. Not really using the passing game too much, but I think there's a good chance he falls into the end zone. I'm not scared of this Jets run defense. That's allowing the most points per game to the running back position this season, nearly 40 DraftKings points per game. They're 27 DVA versus the run, and they're getting killed through the air. Nearly 9 catches, 80 receiving yards, over a 1.5 rushing touchdowns. This is definitely a good spot for Bengals running backs this weekend. Joe Mixon would be the preferred option. James Robinson is $6,600. I think the Seahawks defense will have some ownership this weekend just because they're cheap and they are facing Jacksonville. But if you're not using the Seattle defense, James Robinson's been getting all the work recently, and he's been playing very, very well. I think he's in a very good spot against the team that's allowing the 2nd most points per game in the running back position. Then Henderson will be your chalk running back once again this week. He's been the chalk the past 2 weeks. He was like 50% owned a couple weeks ago, and then he was like 80 to 90% owned in cash games last week. And I would expect somewhat similar ownership here. He gets another good spot versus the Houston Texans. They're allowing nearly 130 rushing yards per game. They're 30th DVA versus the run. They're 22nd versus running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed per game. He's on a high-flying offense. He's a 14-point favorite. Nothing really not to like here. about a 31-point implied team total. And he's using the passing game. Kind of had some bad luck last week where he couldn't get to the end zone, but if he got into the end zone, he would have been happy. So I feel like that won't happen again. So I am just fine firing up Darrell Henderson once again in cash games this weekend. And as far as wide receivers go, I try to keep it simple instead of breaking down each and every single player because it kind of just depends on what quarterback you're using or what stack you're looking for, what run back options you're looking for. Because if you're using Matthew Stafford, yeah, obviously you want to pair him up with Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods or one of his pass catching options. Preferably Cooper Kupp. He's been amazing this year. I think you guys get the idea there. If you're using Josh Allen, use either Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley. I have them all three listed here. They could all get a great matchup versus Miami. They've been terrible versus the pass this season. Terrible versus the run, terrible versus wide receivers, you name it. Their defense has not been good whatsoever. A lot of points should be scored from the Bills' passing attacks. I want some of their options. A.J. Brown, if using Ryan Tannehill, I wouldn't say you have to use Ryan Tannehill. If you use A.J. Brown, he could be like a one-off if you wanted to. Or if you're using Jonathan Taylor, you could use A.J. Brown as a run-back option if you think Tennessee's going to be trailing in this game. But the Colts secondary has been absolutely terrible so far this season. If we just want to pull up the matchups really quick so we can look at that while we're talking about these guys. So Cooper Kupp, I mean, Houston's been kind of tough versus the wide receiver position, but who cares? Like, I don't care about matchups when it comes to elite players. Cooper Kupp has been too good to fade this year. Not saying you have to play Cooper Kupp in cash games this weekend because he's extremely expensive, but overall, the guy's a very good play. Miami's been 30th versus wide receivers. Colts have been 24th versus wide receivers. Calvin, really like him just because he's cheap and volume. You don't have to play Matt Ryan this week, but I do like him for his price point. I think he's cash game viable. Panthers have been kind of stingy versus wide receivers this season, but not overly concerned about it. Chris Godwin if you're using Tom Brady, or you could throw in Mike Evans as well, or whoever pass catching option you want. But since there's no AB, you're kind of just stuck with either Chris Godwin or Mike Evans, but both guys had excellent games last weekend. Brandon Cooks is getting Tyrod Taylor back, so that's definitely a big boost for him. He's just been a target monster this year, and he's been really good. And Tyrod Taylor is definitely a boost for him over Davis Mills. Devonta Smith, if you're using Jalen Hurts, I think that's kind of obvious. I already talked about Sanders. Michael Pittman's one of those guys you can use as a one-off. He gets a great matchup versus Tennessee. They're allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position this year, nearly 50 DraftKings points per game and over 220 receiving yards. T.Y. Hilton should be back this week, so obviously it's going to be a bit of a bump down for him, but as good as he's been this year, he's definitely a deep threat. Has a nice market share of the team's air yards. I think he is totally in play at $5,300. T. Higgins, people will probably keep going back to Jamar Chase, which I don't blame them. Jamar Chase has been amazing this year. T. Higgins hasn't exactly been too exciting, but he had 15 targets last week. Like, I know Jamar Chase had this big blow-up game, but don't ignore the 15 targets that T. Higgins saw. He's still very involved in this offense. So at that price point versus a bad Jets defense, 28th DV versus the pass, another third versus wide receivers, but still not a good defense whatsoever. T. Higgins should definitely still be on our radars because he's getting over 8.5 targets per game and close to a 27.5% target share. So just keep that in mind. Do not ignore it. But really, it all comes down to what your roster construction looks like, especially in tournaments. Cash games, you don't really have to correlate too much. Just pick your favorite point per dollar plays. But in tournaments, yeah, correlate these guys up to your quarterbacks, your stacks, or however your lineups are looking. As far as tight ends go, I wouldn't say it's the greatest position this weekend. Up top, I have T.J. Hawkinson at $5,400. We have Travis Kelce on the main slate. Kyle Pitts is our most expensive tight end, but Hawkinson's a guy I do like in tournaments. I think you could get away with it in cash games, but if you are stacking the Eagles up, you don't want to run it back with the undershift because that's what everyone's doing. You could use T.J. Hawkinson here. He gets peppered with targets. Looking at his numbers on the season, about 50 receiving yards per game, close to 7.5 targets, 20.5% target share, 23% market share of the team's air yards. And the Eagles have not been good versus tight ends so far this season, 27 versus the position, and allow nearly a receiving touchdown per game, so definitely don't mind Hawkinson. Dallas Goedert knows Zach Ertz. He is the clear-cut tight end one of this offense, going to get all the targets. Didn't have a great game last week, but he did have 75 receiving yards and only 3 catches, so I mean, don't mind it. It's in the same game here. Detroit, not scared of their defense, 27th DV versus the pass. Should get plenty of work in this game, so definitely don't mind Goddard. We know he's got big playability, and he's a nice pairing option if you are using Jalen Hurts. Tyler Higbee, $4,500. If you just want a piece of that Rams offense, should be the lowest owned of the bunch when you factor in guys named Darrell Henderson, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Tyler Higbee. You throw them all in the pool together. Tyler Higbee should definitely be the lowest owned there, but I think he had 8 targets last weekend, and obviously it's a good matchup for everybody involved for the Rams. Ricky Seals-Jones, $3,800, pretty much used as a wide receiver, playing over the majority of his snaps in the slot this season, 63% to be exact. So basically, you're one of the best pass catching options of an offense. Not saying it's the most exciting offense, but for $3,800 in the tight end slots, I definitely don't mind Ricky Seals-Jones. I think the guy most people are going to go with is Dan Arnold here at $2,800. He's gotten 13 targets the past 2 weeks with Jacksonville, and he's running the majority of the routes at tight end, and he's got close to a 26% target share of the season. So at $2,800, with there not being many good spending options at quarterback this weekend, probably going to go mid-range at running back to a little bit expensive. Same goes for wide receiver. We have to find some value somewhere. One of my favorite spots to punt is the tight end position and defense, but we have a $2,800 guy that's actually going to be quite involved in a good matchup versus Seattle, so I think he's probably the best way to go in cash games as of right now. And as far as defenses go, just try to pick a home favorite or a defense that you don't think is going to get slaughtered that is decently priced. Like the Rams, yeah, they're the defense you'd want, but they're $5,100. They're 14-point favorites and a low implied team total. But I can't spend that much for a defense. It's going to sacrifice a guy like Chris Godwin from like a 4K wide receiver, which is not worth it in my opinion. Some of the defenses that are fine, the Bengals are going to project to be pretty high owned at $3,600, 10.5-point favorites versus the Jets. Going against a quarterback I'm sure a lot of you haven't even heard of before. 49ers defense gets Chicago, that's fine. Bills defense, only $3,300, 13.5-point favorites at home, 18-point implied team total. The Dolphins have them playing decent, especially Tua, but $3,300 is not a bad price point. You have the Browns, 3.5-point favorites at home, 19.2 implied team total against them, a pretty low total of 42. Seahawks defense with a decently low total at home, only $20 versus Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence is always good for some turnovers. You have the Eagles defense versus Detroit, 3.5-point favorites at $2,700. And I think the Washington football team is actually going to be somewhat popular this weekend. 44-point over-under, 23.5 implied team total against them, 3-point spread, nothing too crazy. They're on the road. Their defense has been terrible this year, but if you just get a few points at $2,100, you will take that all day. But with that being said, that'll probably be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks. It's just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new signing up there, you can get a free money bonus, instant match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. That'll be it. I will stop rambling. I'll see you guys tomorrow for the 2 videos, and I hope you have a fantastic Friday.